hello. This is the Mercury Astrology podcast. I am Rosalie, and
My name is Bren.
we are just here to talk about astrology things that the Denver Astrology Group meetup chats about at the Mercury Cafe once a month, and just kind of wrap up the things in which we talk about at these groups because I feel like we have some good chats, some good discussions, you know.
Definitely. And we want to make it accessible for everyone, even if you can't come to the Denver Astrology meets. We want everyone to know what we've talked about and just general observations that we've made to share with people all over.
Exactly. I feel like there's a lot of good conversations that are had at the meetups, and I feel like we just have like epiphanies as presenters ourselves.
Absolutely.
So, a little bit about us. My name is Rosalie. I'm 27. I have been practicing astrology for a little over a decade now professionally. I have an Aquarius rising and a Virgo sun, and I've been doing the Denver Astrology Group meetup for the past like year and a half now. And my Virgo-ness has definitely desperately needed your Piscean energy. So thank you, Bren.
I am so honored. I'm really excited to be part of the podcast and also the meetup as well. So my name is Bren. I use they, them pronouns, and I've been a professional astrologer for a couple years now. I am more of the intuitive astrologer side. That's the Piscean side, whereas Rosalie kind of goes into the depths of the Virgo, like
Technicality.
yes, of astrology. So we make a great balanced pair, I think.
But we both use whole sign houses, you know,
Yes.
and I feel like we could both describe ourselves as traditional astrologers. Who just kind of focus on things that have been done throughout the tradition, through any aspect of the tradition, whether it be, you know, Hellenistic, Arabic, modern, medieval, you know, and just kind of incorporating it into not only a modern psychological approach, but just into modern day understanding and lived experiences. And yeah, I've always loved your intuitive nature. So
thank you.
I'm excited.
Yeah, and I would love to know a little bit more about your approach also in your readings. I will say that for my readings, or the way that I use astrology practically on a day-to-day basis, sometimes for prediction or just like what's going on in the sky, but also like how do we use the energies that are being presented to us in a way that makes us feel empowered. And yeah,
Astro magic, talismans,
yes,
planetary magic, just days of the week. Days of the week and colors can get you so far in life, honestly. But that's a chat for a whole nother time, because I feel like mitigation is something that I would love to have like a whole meetup discussion about. Yeah.
Definitely.
So yeah, at this past Denver Astrology Group meetup, we actually talked about the shifting nodal eclipses that have been going through, because we just had an eclipse last week here, not too long ago. It was last Tuesday when we did the meetup. So that's
last Saturday.
Last
Tuesday was the eclipse.
Yeah.
Or Tuesday before this past one.
So Tuesday, September 17th at 26 degrees Pisces, we had a lunar eclipse, and this was our first hybrid eclipse, which is pretty tight and exciting. So a hybrid eclipse happens or occurs when the nodes are in either sign. So for example, the North Node has been in Aries for quite a while, and the South Node has been in Libra,
which is its sibling sign.
Exactly, the direct opposition of that sign. And then the lunation that we just had was in Virgo and Pisces. So we had a full moon. So the moon was in Pisces and the sun was in Virgo, but they were close enough to the nodes to where they still eclipsed each other. And we had an eclipse, but the lunation was right next to the sign of the actual nodes. And that happens pretty frequently when the nodes do shift signs, just because the nodes move in that natural retrograde motion. So they're always moving backwards as opposed to forwards, and they move really weird and sporadically. So that's why we get them going backwards to the zodiac sign, and it's going from North Node in Aries to North Node in Pisces, when the planetary progression usually goes Aries to Taurus to Gemini to Cancer, and so on and so forth. But yeah, we just mainly talked about the nodal shift because the node is getting pretty close to the tail end of Pisces now at this point in the sky. So
and eclipses are really important, like on a both mundane and personal level, because especially if it's impacting your chart or hitting certain planets or points in your chart, especially I guess the axes. Yes, the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th house especially. And you can feel the effects of this like a few weeks before and after the eclipses happen. So it's like a story that is building throughout time as well. So lots of fated things that are happening, things that are entering your life and also exiting your life.
Just some sort of like big ending or big new beginning in some sort of area of your life. And that is the majority of people that we had come up and talk about their own charts were people that were either going through a nodal return, a nodal opposition. So when the nodes are either returning to the sign that you have in your chart natally or opposing the sign. So say, for example, the North Node's currently transiting through Aries. Well, that's where your South Node is natally. That's a nodal opposition. And then people who had their nodes on the angles were definitely intensified. Sometimes it was a douplication. So sometimes it would be a nodal return and on the angles, and you could definitely hear it in the stories.
Yeah.
And hear it in the experiences of those in the group who wanted to share their experience. Because the North Node tends to intensify things, and the South Node tends to detensify things. So when you're having like a nodal opposition on the angles, it's just this time where you have to kind of let go of everything that you've been holding on to your entire life in some sort of regard, or some sort of reversal where you have to hold on to something that you've been letting go for so long.
And I actually want to speak to this because I'm actually going through my nodal opposition, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I am an Aries rising, Aries moon, and Pisces sun.
Oh, I also did not mention this earlier, but ditto on the pronouns.
Oh yeah, cool.
Sorry,
okay, continue. Them is great. We love that. So what I noticed, since we're actually approaching a Libra new moon eclipse right now, is that this podcast actually started, our partnership started. And I just think that's so on the nose, which is really cool. This new events kind of coming into my life and a partnership, which is in my 7th house, Libra, and also like focusing on also feeling more confident in my abilities of the gifts that I have in regards to astrology, and partnering with that has been really cool to
no. And we caught a nice little Pisces ascendant right on Saturn, separating from a conjunction with Saturn when we started this. So happy to see that on the current clock that I have on solar fire.
And what does that mean to you for our listeners who might not?
I think okay, so it's an electional point in astrology, just looking at the time in which something starts or something begins. But because our dynamic specifically is on the Virgo Pisces axis, and we not only started hosting these meetups together during the shift of the eclipses in these signs, big beginnings, new like changes, but then also catching a start time of this specific podcast episode with a Pisces ascendant. It just really solidifies the like connection and the contract, especially with Saturn on the ascendant too. To be like, no, this is a done deal. We got this,
And we've been talking about this actually for a little while. This idea has been in the air, and it's now that the eclipse
finally coming to fruition. Yeah. No, I think it's literally perfect divine timing, as you said.
So lovely.
A great example of how eclipses can affect your lives and can be, and like the eclipses for me are happening in my 2nd and 8th house,
Oh yeah. And we were talking about finances for you too.
No.
If you don't mind me being
That's fine.
But like you started, hosting the astrology meetups in Denver about a year and a half ago, right? And we actually were thinking that might have been around a different eclipse, correct?
No, 1000%. That was around.
Which one?
I'm pretty. Oh, they're not listed on the sheet because it was the Sagittarius Gemini eclipses. I think we're just wrapping up, and we were just dipping into the Scorpio Taurus ones. I think that was the eclipse shift that Chris had presented on before I just kind of like took over.
Yeah. So and now this is like
a year and a half, 2 years
into your 2nd and 8th house story of your finances.
I guess it's been like 2 years now, because it's really been since like we started the meetups up after the pandemic was when he reached out to me and was like, hey, you want to do this casual meetup to just like get the group going again? Because I don't have time for this. And I was like,
this was after
the COVID, yeah.
So this was maybe a while ago then, 3 years even?
I'd say like 2 years, because we waited a while. We took a big long break of not meeting up in person because I'm pretty sure Chris is immunocompromised himself.
Oh yeah.
Or lives with somebody who is, or is just very cautious in general. So he doesn't really like to leave, from what I have perceived. It's the Scorpio in him, I see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely loved the chat that we had at this past meetup, and I feel like the dynamic and the shift was just so perfect, because I can be over technically sometimes. And with my exalted Mercury, not to brag to anybody who has Mercury in Gemini, but Mercury in Virgo is astrologically and technically superior. But sometimes my brain functions a little bit too quick and a little bit too fast for people. So I like your groundedness to be like, hey, for the viewers at home who don't know what you're fucking talking about right now, like break it down for them.
Yeah. Well, and I'm one of them too, in a lot of ways. I do know a lot about astrology, and also like you do operate in like a crazy high, like technical realm that I am not as familiar with. So yeah, I'm glad that we're doing this together.
No, it's nice. I like
wonderful.
Yeah, our little intentions for it and whatnot.
My Mercury's in Aquarius, by the way, if anyone cared.
Oh yeah, so right on my ascendant.
Yeah.
Well, ish, not really, because I'm a late degree
It's more
Aquarius
on
ascendant.
your
I'm a last
Uranus.
decan.
It's closer to, I think, your Uranus.
Right. But anyway, the hybridity-ness of the eclipses was a big talking point. So a lot of people wanted to talk about, because this current eclipse that we just had on September 17th is really like the starting point or the focal point for what's to be in the next year and a half, as these eclipses further keep going, you know, and
into Pisces, the Pisces Virgo axis. Yeah. So the way that you can look at this in your chart, if you are newer to this, is to find your rising sign. Your rising sign is really important to know really a lot of essential things about who you are in your chart anyway. And then whatever house Virgo and Pisces is in, that's going to be the emphasis of where it's going to be at. So if you are in, you know, a Pisces rising, for example, that's going to be in your first and your seventh house. So relation to who you are, and also seventh house matters, which is like partnerships, things like that.
Any one-on-one connection. Yeah.
One-on-one connections, clients, business partnerships,
enemies, lovers.
Exactly.
And that's also angular. So that's probably going to be a very key or defining eclipse for you in your life, you know?
Especially, yeah.
Run through housing significations real quick?
Sure.
Tight. So first house, house of self, it's the helm, the head of the ship. It's you to its truest form. Second house is going to be possessions. So it's things that you own, but it's kind of like your basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's not only food, shelter, clothing, but it's also community. You know, it's also food, like things that you quite literally need to survive.
That wouldn't be the third house.
I feel like the third house is also community in a sense of like your everyday, like who you interact with on a day-to-day basis, because it's very lunar. It's consistently inconsistent. It's the housing joy of the moon. The third house is a little bit more like your everyday routine in your body, like how you physically spend time in your body. Like you spend every single day with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and in your own body. There's got to be some house that represents that aspect of just you in your separated flesh suit. Because, like,
and you would say that's the second house?
Oh, the third.
The third.
Because it's the housing joy of the moon. So it's the house of goddess.
Okay.
But more like day-to-day interactions. So day-to-day things could be like you learn something new every day. So like small, minor education, you know, and that's where you get the education aspect of the third house versus the ninth house. The third house being that minor education, the ninth house being higher education.
Cool.
Or like fundamental connections or understanding, which can sometimes relate to the parents, because the parents are usually responsible for like teaching a kid how to read and write, usually in like their super early adolescence or something along those lines, you know?
And the second house is not the body though.
No, the second house is more possessions, like material things, like things that you own or things that you use to nourish your body, things outside of your body that are still important to your body, but there's a lot of overlap between the houses.
Absolutely. Thanks for the clarification.
No, of course. Moving forward, we get the fourth and the 10th house, which is our next angular kind of polarity. So the fourth house is your home, your family, your private life, what you keep secret to you, the most subterraneous place in the chart, you know, things really low below the horizon. So your secrets are 100% your family business, you know? You don't be sharing that shit with just anybody.
It can definitely be your ancestry as well, roots, where you come from,
No,
childhood.
Understanding things like that. And then childhood kind of also ties into the fifth house of like joys, entertainment, hobbies, a childlike demeanor, but also physical children. So like having children, being a caregiver, doing things with children in the fifth.
And I like to think of the fifth house too as like creation, like literally you have to,
because it's Venus.
Yes. Come together to create something. So if you're not, you know, if you don't have kids, but you have fifth house placements, that could have an emphasis on creativity of some kind.
No, 1,000%. Like Jupiter's transiting through my fifth house right now. So it's an abundance of
fun
co-creation with you.
Yeah. I love that. This is our baby.
Our baby. Moving forward, the sixth house is, from the fifth to the sixth house we get so the fifth house we get good fortune. The fifth house we get bad fortune.
The sixth house.
Thank you. The sixth house we get bad fortune. So this is more like lack of recognition.
Mhm.
Kind of areas in life in which you aren't heard, you aren't understood in some sort of way. It's usually related in a traditional aspect to slavery or
Mhm.
some sort of oppression, in
Mhm.
some sort of sense. So in a modern context, I usually say it's your 9 to 5.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and
that's
it can
usually
also
my.
signify so many other
It
things
can.
too. This
Oh,
is
a
very
thousand
basic,
percent.
but also pets. Do
Mhm.
you have two
No, like small
babies?
pets. Yeah, small animals can be in the 6th house. It's not all bad. Like it's Mars's housing joy. So Mars can be destructive, sure, but it's also very
Will be.
necessary to destroy something
Oh,
sometimes, to tear something down that's no longer of use, to
so true.
have bad fortune in. Order to humble yourself.
So
Um,
true.
it's a powerful house for sure. It's definitely one of the more negative ones that can be a little bit more difficult.
Well, and
Um,
it's paired with the 12th house as well, which is another
Difficult house.
challenging
Yeah, we'll get to
house.
that.
Yeah.
Well, the 5th house, or sorry, the 6th, the 2nd, the 8th, and the 12th also cannot aspect the ascendant.
Mhm.
So they cannot form a perfect Ptolemaic aspect, so a square, a triene, or a hexagon or a sextile to the ascendant. So because they can't form that relationship, it's like you can't see them. It's
Mhm.
a blind spot when you're
It's
driving a
the
car.
John Cena
hmm
aspect.
So those houses inherently just have more negative qualities to them, in general.
Mhm. And
Um,
just because you have placements there doesn't mean you're doomed.
as you're a
It's
12th houser.
yeah, I'm a 12th houser and you're
And I'm an
an
eighth
8th
houser,
houser.
yeah.
We get it. We get it. And also, yeah, we can use that information though to empower ourselves. So don't get ahead of yourself if you get
No,
worried about
1000%.
that. No use in that.
Yeah. And then the 7th house is going to be your others. So if the first house is the house of self, the opposite of that is going to be other people. So any one-on-one connection, any one-on-one relationship. People that
Mhm.
have their sons in the 7th house usually live a lot or see themselves through other people, or
Mhm.
like don't feel like themselves unless they're around
Mhm.
other people or have those deep one-on-one connections in some sort of way.
Mhm.
Um,
I've noticed that people with their moon also in their 7th house, if they are not in a good
Stable,
place,
yeah.
yeah, with their one-on-one connections, they are very disturbed.
Yep.
They're like bothered.
Yeah.
So
Physically bothered.
yeah.
And then 8th house, I feel very qualified to talk about this, but also like I never do it justice in some sort of way.
The
It
8th and 12th house are the harder
to,
houses
to
to
describe.
understand.
No,
Yeah.
I
They're
100% agree.
more
I feel like it's like the Aquarius and Scorpio, like of the
mm,
zodiac, how they're like difficult to understand and describe to somebody. That Aquarius is like not the humanitarian, they're the mad scientist,
yeah,
who might have a humanitarian heart, sure, but that's not because they're an
right.
Aquarius.
Well, and I think Aquarius often also gets paired with like Piscean placements as well. I mean, in a theory, I guess,
Yeah,
which
they
is
do.
more like compassionate. Because if your son's, if you're an Aquarius but close, you could have like a Pisces Mercury or a
Mhm.
Pisces Venus, like or a Pisces Moon,
I
whatever.
also think that Aquarius is nothing like Pisces. It's still Saturnian ruled. It's cold as fuck. It's dry as fuck. It's an air sign. It's aloof.
As Pisces,
Or comparatively to Pisces.
what were you saying about the
Aquarius,
Saturnian?
though, is Saturnian. It
Yes,
is
not
harsher.
Pisces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Aquarius is just like so different from Pisces in so many
Mhm.
ways. So the fact that people,
It's a blend.
yeah, I
It
know.
can be. I've got both Piscean and
Aquarian
Aquarius.
energy.
Yeah.
No, I get it. But anyway, the 8th house I feel like is death, fear, and anxiety, to
Mm-hmm.
simple keyword term it. But it's more than
Mm-hmm.
that. It's like the sense of idleness. It's like you're functioning, you're awake, you are
Mm,
there, but you're not doing anything.
sure.
It's just like the concept and feeling of bed rot. You literally just lay
Mm,
in bed all day and do absolutely nothing
I
and
find it
like
so
hate yourself
interesting.
over it.
That's how you're describing it.
But it is other people's money, because you can use like derivative
Mhm,
houses. So if the 2nd house is like your possessions, the
mhm,
7th house is other people's. So the 8th house would be other people's possessions because it's a
mhm,
second from the seventh. But that's a whole thing
mhm.
in
And
itself.
inheritances, things
Mhm.
like that. Okay.
So it gets tied into like other things like that. If you don't have natal like 8th house placements, that's usually how it manifests.
Mhm.
If you have natal house placements, you understand the anxiety I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You understand the dread that just lives eternally inside of you.
Yeah.
I like to, because I have my moon in the 11th, right, in Sagittarius, and then I have
Mhm,
my Virgo sun and Mercury in the 8th house, and
mhm,
I describe myself as nihilistically optimistic.
mhm. I'm so proud of you for sharing all this information. You guys are very privileged to be hearing Rosalie's
I haven't
birth chart
shared too much about
information,
my chart.
but yeah, wonderful. And like, yeah, did we want to talk about like sex also, eighth house versus fifth house, if that even?
I feel like they show up in both. I feel like they also show up in the third house because it's like your sense of body, like so your security in your
Mm-hmm.
body and your security in your sexual relationships. I usually see in third house connections.
That's interesting.
In fourth house things, like if they're like super kinky and like don't want to talk about it, you know, if they're super secretive about it. If you're like, oh wow, I did not expect you to be into like that kind of stuff, you know,
That'd
it's
be the fourth house.
fourth house thing, you know. Fifth housey things I see with a lot of pleasure, like a lot of like entertainment stuff. Sometimes I see fifth housey, 10th housey placements in sex where people will have like public sex kinks, you
Oh
know.
damn.
Not to get all like TMI and
Well, Venus is in Scorpio right now, so I
yeah,
mean,
I guess
I guess it kind of makes sense.
it's fine to talk about this.
Yeah.
But I see sex in a lot of the houses in astrology. It depends on what you're talking about. There's a Mac Miller song, right? In the end of the Mac Miller song, it's a bunch of girls talking around, and they say pretty fucking well. There's a difference between fucking, making love, and having sex.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel like there's different just like there's different thoughts of expression and knowledge. Like I see your instincts as your sun, your intuition as your moon, your learned knowledge as your Mercury, and your wisdom as your Jupiter, your sense of failure and your learning from failure from Saturn. And that's fucking almost every planet that I just listed off there that represents knowledge in some sort of way.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
like there's a lot of overlap in a lot of these things.
Yeah.
But the eighth house is mostly just that kind of, I don't know, idleness, I'd say is the best way to describe it. It's not always anxious, you know, but it can be. And it has the potential to create fear and anxiety from that sitting and moving, but not being active kind of concept.
Would you say that the eighth house, like the fourth house, would be secretive at all?
Not really, because it's still above the ascendant, but it is in the part of the ascendant descendant line. Well, it's above the descendant. But it's still above that axis in some sort of way. But the interesting thing about the eighth house and the 12th house, that's the part where if something is in that part of the sky, like astronomically, like outside in the sky, and we were to look at it, our atmosphere would blur it and we wouldn't actually be able to see it until it rises a little bit over the horizon or a little bit higher over the descendant and isn't as like fallen over there. So there's points in the sky that we can't actually like physically see, and that's where the 12th house and the 8th house exist in that kind of like fogginess. So the 12th house is kind of the fog before dawn, where everything's a little bit quieter and a little bit eerier, and the 8th house is kind of like dusk.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just that more like kind of emo edgy vibe.
Spooky,
like, yeah. So yeah. And then the ninth house is more not only higher education, but there's a lot of things associated with the ninth house, your belief systems, your sense of understanding the broader world around you, which is often related to a lot of religious beliefs, as well as occult beliefs. So occultism and philosophy are described in the ninth house. It's pretty much just like any higher understanding of life, I feel like, is expressed in the ninth house. And in that, you get a lot of like foreign travel, different cultures, different cultural expression. Like I've seen people with like ninth house transits that are going abroad to teach English to Korean students, you know, like just like the coolest and awesomest kind of dynamics. And then in the 10th house, you just see like a lot more, I guess, kind of just your eminence, like how you portray yourself, how other people understand and conceptualize you as a human, what kind of energy you radiate into the world around you. It's the opposite of that fourth house. You know, the fourth house is that subterraneous point, whereas like the 10th house is that eminence point. It's the point of cultivation or culmination. Thank you.
Would you say that like that is more apparent? The 10th house features are more apparent than even the first house? On a first glance, perhaps, or
sometimes. I definitely think it depends on the individual, and it depends on if the midhaven is also in the 10th house or if the midhaven falls into the either 9th or 11th, depending on location, time of birth, year of birth, kind of thing like that. But I do feel like the 10th house definitely has this kind of more professional vibe to it. Like how people know you, I guess I would say, yeah, at first glance, like on surface level, like people's kind of first exposure to you. And then once they get to know you, they're like, oh, this is more of your rising sign, you know? Cool. But also at the same time, I feel like I present myself as very Aquarian. Like you just fucking clock me as like,
but you also have Jupiter. You are
oh yeah,
Aquarius
abundant,
rising,
yeah.
and you have a Jupiter first house.
Yeah,
so I mean, that would appear to be bigger. And whereas I have my Jupiter actually in my 10th house. So a lot of people see me as that like Capricorn 10th house, like
What
I
you do
have
for a
my
living.
shit together. Yeah, but also I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
No, 100%. And I could just feel like that question itself is just your different perspective on the angle.
Yeah, for sure.
So it is just really quite literally dependent. I feel
Yeah.
like people see me individually more as my ascendant, but they might see you more as the 10th house. So I guess it really just depends on if you have Jupiter on the angle.
For sure. Well, and also a celebrity, for example, like you might see that their accomplishments
and what they're known
for in the 10th house. Yeah.
To be like, we were looking at chart examples for this and we are like, Salvador Dali. And I was like, didn't he just get like described as a super racist motherfucker or something like that? I don't know. You only know what he's I don't know him personally, you know? Sure. I don't know his ascendant. I can't speak for him as him.
Yeah, like Brooke Shields, for example, has a Venus 10th house. So like she's known for her beauty.
Yeah, no, 1000%. That's a great example. So yeah, that's kind of 10th house all wrapped up, just kind of that like culmination point of like exposure, I guess is the best way, or radiance. And then the 11th house is the house of good spirit. So it is your hopes, your aspirations, your desires, your goals, like what you're striving towards, I guess. Like what motivates you really can be found in the 11th house. A lot of people associate the 11th house with like friendships and stuff too. And I can see like a group setting and stuff. I see it a lot in the 10th too, just like, in order to be perceived by those around you, you kind of have to like be around people kind of thing. So sometimes in order to achieve your hopes, your aspirations and desires, you kind of like need other people to build off of, whether it just be like a person that you're stealing an idea from to get you rolling off the ground and get you going, or if it's like co-hosting something with somebody and finding that it's immensely easier to get done, those kinds of things.
For sure.
And then do you actually want to talk about the 12th house as a 12th houser?
I mean, I could. It's just so elusive. I'm like, how could I put it into words?
Hey, I have to do the 8th house.
That's valid. Okay, 12th house. I can talk about 12th house. I mean, from my own perspective, because you're kind of talking about the more traditional meanings of the houses, which is a perspective for sure. And a lot of them do align with how I use astrology. However, like I don't really like associate the 6th house personally, like with bad luck, for example, even though that is the traditional perspective, it can be used that way for sure. So anyway, the 12th house for me is like, it's dreams, it's your dream state, your subconscious. So what you don't really have access to consciously, it is like right behind that ascendant, kind of like what we were talking about earlier about there's those certain houses that are not aspected in certain ways. So this is one of those houses where it's like really elusive. It's something that you have to dig into in order to see it, if you can even see it at all. So
and then to be all traditionally keywordy, it's isolation. It's, it's subconscious thought is more of like a modern approach to it, but self-isolation is sitting in your own fucking head, and that's a lot of like mental and dealing with and subconscious dealing.
Yes, there can be like addictions, things like that, like self-defeating behaviors that can appear in the 12th house. I also can see that in the 6th house though. It's sibling sign. Like
no, 1000%.
I really do see a lot of comparisons with like opposite houses. And if you have a big concentration in one house, it might overfill into that opposite house and appear there. So if you do like 6th house, for example, work a lot or have that like slavery, grind kind of thing, that can then lead into that 12th house, like addictive behaviors or needing of isolation, like going to a hospital, for example. Maybe you overwork so much that you have no choice
get to yourself rest. There
but to force there. So 12th house is also associated with prisons, hospitals, any type of
also like hidden enemies too, like people that you're unaware of, but also hidden supports in that same breath. It can be hidden guidances or just things that are hidden from you in general, and that doesn't always have to inherently be negative,
especially I see that with like 12th house Jupiters, for example. It's like there's something hidden about like miraculously you get out of things, or you have like a guardian angel. I kind of think of that.
I mean, the 12th house is Saturnian ruled because it's the Saturn joy. Saturn has its Saturn rejoices in the 12th house. There we go. There's words. There's that little Mercury in the 8th coming out there for you guys.
We love that.
But Saturn rejoices in the 12th. It does not rule over the 12th. But rejoicing in the 12th, it is happy in that kind of environment and in that mindset. And Saturn is still a planet of like harsh truths, but truths that are necessary, so sometimes the 12th house can be things that are uncomfy, but unnecessarily or necessarily so.
Yeah. Well, and it's also Saturn's the planet of structure. So it's kind of interesting. We're talking about these isolated places like a hospital, you probably have a regimented or a prison, there is a schedule, and that can be helpful because it's like, what to expect, what you have to work towards. And it's also the father of time or the planet of time.
Yeah. So isolation, losing time, getting lost in time, those kinds of things.
But also the things you can gain through time. So like
wisdom, understanding, learning from failures, all that kind of jazz.
Exactly. And as someone who's going through their Saturn return right now in the 12th house, I can tell you that a big lesson that I've been learning is like how to structure your mind and habits in ways that are healthy for you. So you're not your own enemy. Because a lot of the hidden enemy stuff in the 12th house, like for me, I'm not like a huge public figure or whatever. So like, I don't know who my hidden enemies are externally. I could have a lot of haters, but for me, it's really been about like, well, how have I been my own hidden enemy in ways like that I've been behaving that has not been aligned with what I'm actually wanting. But it's in my 12th house again. So like those energies are hard. My Mars and my Sun is also there. So
no, 100%.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that if you experience eclipses in these areas of life, it might not be always the most intense or the things that you're like, oh, this is the biggest ending or new beginning in my life. Like, yes, it's super cool that we're doing this podcast, but it's not like pivotal to me as an individual. Like I'll still always love astrology and I'll still always love talking to you about astrology.
This is what house axis for you again?
2nd and 8th.
And your 2nd and 8th. Well, and I meant to say this earlier too, but financially as well, like that was something that I wanted to introduce to Rosalie because Rosalie is just too kind in the most self-destructive ways sometimes by not accepting, like Rosalie works so hard.
Information should be free. Capitalism is a scam.
So true. And also we live in a capitalistic world.
So and I need to survive.
Yes. So that's, I feel like this is your story that you're learning is like, how can I, accept resources with what I'm doing?
Okay. But my point is that the eclipses might be a little bit more potent or spicy in your life if they're on the angles or if you're having a nodal return or a nodal opposition. So if you natally have, North Node in Virgo, for example, you're walking into your nodal opposition here soon. So this eclipse that we had on September 17th might be your first precursor into the next couple of eclipses that we'll have, that you're like, oh, this is what I need to learn. This is what I need to be focusing on now. Right. Not always. We talked about how there are a little bit more abstract-y kind of themes that we can kind of start seeing develop and form, but we might not know all of the nitty-gritty details of it yet. Our next eclipses through this sign. So on March 13th, we'll get a lunar eclipse.
Of what year?
2025. So we will have another eclipse on October 2nd that'll be solidified in the Aries of Libra axis. And this will be our last Libra Aries eclipse. So it'll be our last eclipse where both the nodes and the lunation are in Aries and Libra. And then January of next year, we get the nodes moving, the North Node moving into Pisces. And then by March of next year, we start our next eclipse season. So on March 13th, we get a lunar eclipse at 24 degrees of Virgo. And then on March 29th, we get a solar eclipse at 9 degrees of Aries. But because the nodes have already moved into Virgo Pisces, that solar eclipse in Aries is a hybrid eclipse. So it's a wrapping up of whatever the last year and a half of Aries Libra eclipses have been beginning or starting in you. So maybe you think you've wrapped it up, but you got to tie a couple more loose ends or pay a couple more fees or dot a couple I's kind of jazz.
Well, and something that we emphasized at the meeting was that these eclipses can reverberate like months.
Oh, 1,000%.
So you had like a really beautiful like illustration of this where like if you throw a pebble into the lake, it will ripple out. So think of that as like an eclipse, like the actual impact into the water, that is the eclipse exacting, but for months after that, it can still reverberate. So
yeah, even as that stone skips and the transits change and the transits move, like you'll still have that first splashes reverberation by the time that the stone finally sinks into the water.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So definitely look at your chart, see where this is impacting.
I totally even forgot to even use that as an analogy, to be completely honest with you.
Know what? It stuck with me. So
sorry, continue what you were saying.
No, yeah, just if you want to see how this is impacting you, or maybe like there are people in your life that, and I don't know how advanced of an astrologer, like the people who are listening to this, I just want to make sure it's accessible for everyone. But if this is your first time, like really learning about eclipses, like you can look at what area of chart or what area of life in your chart it's impacting, and then go from there and just look up like basic significations. Or if maybe people around you, it's not you who's really directly feeling this, maybe it's the people around you. So then you can kind of like see their charts and see how you can maybe help them, or know how to, you know,
better help
facilitate.
yourself, yeah, through using them as like a jumping off point kind of jazz.
Exactly.
No, I love how you keep focusing on the North Node going into my into Pisces, because it's my nodal opposition. So this is something that like
you're moving into,
because my North Node is in Virgo. So I'm really trying to embrace taking your advice financially and worrying about my basic necessities and needs and sense of community.
With you, you were saying,
but letting go of my self-deprecation.
That's true. And also, like you were saying, like the angles, yes, it will feel more impactful for you, but because you're entering into your nodal opposition, that's going to be especially impactful for you as well. So
yeah. I feel like angles definitely are like the most exclamation point you can get into a chart.
Okay, let's get technical here. I get that. I'm just also saying there's room for both here.
No, that's valid. That's valid. Speaking of which, we can't really talk about the charts that we went over with people in the actual group because of confidentiality reasons. You know, they're not here to speak on themselves. Like our recollections of what they had to say about their life might not be exactly, you know, what we're dealing with. So we actually found a fucking fantastic example of a celebrity who everybody has been on the mind of lately. A lost hero. There he goes. Dave Grohl, who was born January 14th of 1969 at 7:33 a.m. in Warren, Ohio, for those who want to pull up his chart at home, and has an 18-degree Capricorn rising, conjunct his sun at 24 degrees of Capricorn. Also has his North Node at 3 degrees of Aries. So he is having a big ending with this eclipse season that's kind of wrapping up in a nodal return.
Yep. So
that's on an angle.
Yes. So this is the perfect example, because this is literally, so his fourth house is where his Aries North Node is at 3 degrees. So he, if you don't know, his recent scandal is that he was caught. Well, he had an extramarital, he had an extramarital affair that resulted in a child. And so this is stirring up the things of home. So that's fourth house matters. And therefore, also now that this is becoming public, that 10th house is also being active with that South Node Libra. There's a release of something. So a release of literal like harmony within the, you know, 10th house matters, how he's seen by his fans.
He had to cancel dates on a tour.
Yeah.
Like that's a big fucking thing for a band as big as Foo Fighters, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's also in a Venus ruled sign, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Venus, a little background about Dave Grohl, for those of you who don't know. He was the drummer in a band called Nirvana for a year or so. Like it wasn't a long time. He only recorded like one album with them before Kurt died. Yeah. I have disgustingly educated myself on not only Dave Grohl's chart, but also Kurt Cobain's, because fun conspiracy theory moment. We'll get into it at another time, but I think Dave Grohl knew what Courtney Love was doing and what Courtney Love was planning, and Courtney Love 1,000% was behind the murder of Kurt Cobain.
Oh wow.
Or at least the assisted suicide of Kurt Cobain, however you want to look at it. I think she definitely influenced that whole situation to happen, because she benefited too much from it, and so did he. Like Dave Grohl just like would not have been the front man of a fucking 90s grunge band who won many records without that happening.
We have opinions here.
Anyway, point is, Dave Grohl later went on to create the band Foo Fighters in 1994. After actually,
you have dates. You have got this.
Yeah, because Kurt Cobain died April of 1994, I believe, and then Foo Fighters actually released their first album like January or something of 1995.
And wouldn't that have been also during? We should pull Kurt's chart up, because wouldn't that also be during his nodal reversal? Opposition. It was during his Saturn return, which usually
I think he has North Node and Pisces, to be honest with you, which would be a great example talking about the like hybridity of these eclipses and how we're kind of like shifting into this kind of mindset.
Anyway, we're talking about Dave.
Yeah, because Dave is in the news right now. There's things that are currently happening in his life that are coinciding with these Aries Libra eclipses that at the tail end of this eclipse cycle we're just now hearing about it.
Yeah.
You know, I would not be surprised if there was some news thing that came out on October 2nd when we have our last like actual eclipse like solidly in Aries Libra. If it's some like publicity thing to be like all tours are canceled, Foo Fighters are taking a break for a while, if some other public release form comes out, if just some maybe an interview or something, like I feel like that's what we're building up to, and that's what next week. So we'll see. And then I feel like in next year in March, when we get that hybrid eclipse, which touches Aries, so we have that solar eclipse in early degrees of Aries, it's still close enough to technically be an eclipse, even though the nodes have moved into Pisces and Virgo. That might be potentially just a time where like we see like
the closing of that chapter.
That maybe just like the end of like Foo Fighters, I guess, resurgence of fame, because you know grunge has become like more popular again, I guess, in recent years, because the 90s is the new 80s. I don't know if you remember growing up, we'd have like 80s day in like elementary school and stuff, and our parents would be like, we're not that old, you know. And now it's like us on that receiving end to be like, these aren't that long ago, you know. But I feel like that kind of resurgence of like grunge, kind of alt vibes might die down a little bit, maybe. Or just the idolization of quite literally, there goes my hero, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts about also the signs that they're in, specifically within the 4th house, within the 10th house. So, you know, that North Node in Aries in the 4th house, like Aries is kind of that selfish, also destructive. Well, it can be.
Well, it can be 100%. Well, the fact that it was a secret for so long and we're just now hearing about it, definitely 4th housey, like what you keep secret, what you keep hidden, like your extramarital affair, 100%. But
well, like a lot of people seem surprised by it because that 10th house, he does appear to be that Libran, like, you know,
I'm just a cool guy. I'm so faithful to my wife. I love my kids. I teach my kids how to drum. Yeah, they come up on stage with me. Like you just see him as this like kind of good dad figure, you know? And that's how he has portrayed himself in that harmonious kind of jazz. Well, because he has Jupiter in the 10th too. So that kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier with your Jupiter in the 10th as well, of like people just know you better for your career, you know? So like I feel like the persona of Dave Grohl was more apparent in his actual lived experience and in his lived life than the person Dave Grohl. You know?
Yeah. Well, and another additional just thing that I just noticed is that Uranus is literally at 3 degrees also at that South Node in Libra.
So it's chaotic unveiling.
And just like all of a sudden, you know,
it was just out of nowhere.
Well, and then the Jupiter just 2 degrees later at 5 degrees, it's like it's big. So it's activated.
It's like it's out of nowhere and it's big, because it's like celebrities have extramarital affairs all the time, but to like take accountability for it, I think is a thing that is like really, and I guess the shock factor of like Dave fucking Grohl.
I know.
Like, come on.
Yeah.
I don't know. I also feel like because his north node is so close to Chiron at 29 degrees, 25 minutes of Pisces, and this was a hybrid eclipse that we just went through. So I don't know exactly what degree 26 degrees of Pisces the September 17th lunar eclipse was at. So that's only 3 degrees away from his natal Chiron, you know, and his Venus and part of fortune are at 10 degrees of Pisces, co-present in that sign. So for this hybrid eclipse to be around the time that this starts coming out and starts being said, because I think it happened like a day or two before that eclipse. I can look to his Instagram and find that date, but that's a lot of work right now.
But again, like it's
gonna be healing for him.
Exact. Well, hopefully. I don't know his personal.
It's a very karmic thing.
Sure.
This coming out was justly deserved. Like he didn't do anything that he didn't deserve. Like his reputation getting tanked right now is necessary for him. That's where I see like the North Node and Chiron kind of come through in his chart. Especially because they're in different signs. Like, yeah, the Chiron is at 29 degrees, 25 minutes of Pisces, and his North Node is at 3 degrees, 0 minutes, retrograding in Aries. So it's actually approaching that Chiron or applying towards it. So it's like that intensification of that kind of aspect, because they're both moving towards each other. But they're in different signs. So there is some sort of disconnect. That North Node wants to focus on the ego, whereas that Chiron wants to heal in the Pisces. So he probably had genuine intention, sure, and he can probably talk his way into like maintaining the relationships in which he's like actively destroying right now in his life. But I don't think it's going to be immediate. I think it's definitely going to take him a really long time to rebuild his reputation or rebuild his career.
Sure.
If not 8 years, definitely 19, you know, which is nodal opposition and return again.
Yeah, I find that really interesting.
Because the fact that this didn't come out until he was closer to his exact nodal
Mhm.
return, because the North Node starts at 29 degrees of Aries and works its way towards 0 degrees of Aries. Like it moves backwards through the
Right.
sign. So the fact that it has been moving backwards and we're getting the nodes so close to those like 3 degrees, and this is the eclipse that we had
Mhm.
that was closest to his natal North Node. And this is
Mhm.
the eclipse where it all comes out.
Yeah. I wonder if there's anything going on with him like October of 2023, which is when this eclipse cycle started in Aries and Libra, if something was going up maybe behind the
That's
scenes
probably
or
when he started seeing her, maybe, or like, I mean, 9 months ago. Well, I don't know how long she
oh,
is.
oh
Did
yeah,
they like birth the
baby.
kid already, or is it she just like she found out she was pregnant and he was like, oh, well, the jig is up?
Oh,
I don't know
that's
the whole
interesting.
like
I haven't either.
circumstances of it. Yeah, we
I
probably
haven't
should have
either.
done more research into this.
Well,
I don't
this is our
know.
first
It was
episode,
a
so
great example chart to just kind of talk
yeah.
about the importance of like how big endings and big new changes and some sort of eclipses act as harbingers of change. They're
Yes.
catalysts. They 100% just push things in movement that may have already existed for a while.
I would assume that something like this was probably bubbling under the surface because again, that's the fourth house. And
Mhm.
again,
Super
this
secretive.
started a year ago, this eclipse
Mhm.
cycle. So this is just the culmination of the
A year and a
outcome.
half, 2 years ago, depending. But
I think the most for this one, it was it was like October 14th of last year, which is
oh
when
yeah, I
it
guess it's true.
started.
It would have been like a year ago.
Yeah.
Well, we had a little bit of hybrid eclipses back in that March, I believe, as well.
Okay.
Because it's usually March, October. Well, I mean, it shifts and it changes, so it's not consistent.
Yeah.
We'll
We'll
double
do
back.
more, yeah.
We'll do more
Do more
research.
research next time.
Yeah, we'll be better prepared.
Wonderful.
But I think this has been a great chat, a great wrap up. I feel like,
Absolutely.
we hit all the key points in which things that we found interesting from our like 2 hour long discussion.
Yeah.
Wrapped it up in a pretty good, conclusive thing. I obviously this might be the longest that we do because we had to like establish things,
Who
but
knows? But also, yeah, just like before we close, just
yeah.
overall themes too that we noticed within that meeting.
Mhm.
Because we were talking mostly about the Pisces Virgo axis, or we talked kind of about both,
We kind of
but
talked about both because we talked about how this most current eclipse is kind of like a precursor into the next year and a
mhm,
half. So we really
mhm,
focused on like what people were predicting for themselves.
yeah.
But there was a couple of people who came up that wanted to share like wrapping up stories of like what they think this October eclipse is gonna like really culminate for them
Mhm,
and what they think it's really just gonna like settle in. And for me, this is like third house, ninth housey things.
yeah,
So I've been just drawing a shit ton recently. Like
yeah.
I've been spending every day drawing and like throwing myself. For those of you who don't know, apart from being a professional astrologer, I also dabble in body modifications. So I'm an apprentice at a tattoo shop. I've been a piercer now for a little over a year, and I don't know, I just draw constantly. Like that's the thing that I've been kind of like closing. Well, I've incorporated it into my day-to-day routine, which is third house,
Mhm,
in Aries, so that north node energy. And then ninth housey south node stuff. Honestly, I've not like pulled away from my occulty craft, but I've pulled away from like doing new things in my occulty
mhm,
craft because I feel like I found like a consistent way in which I can mitigate the things in my life, help me maintain like a spiritual connection consistently and like walk away
mhm,
from it, not like dealing with it.
mhm.
So going into my nodal opposition, I definitely feel the intensity kind of shift in the changes in which it's coming. Like even the fact that I'm like actively being aware of what these changes are like physically in my life, like this podcast, for example, and
Mhm,
starting
mhm.
doing the astrology
And
podcast
that's
stuff again.
literally third and ninth house thing is educational based, which is
Hmm.
kind of interesting.
Hmm. But that shift,
And then the
yeah, I can
shifting
kind of
into
second eighth.
and then also making that a financial
Hmm.
thing. And also I feel like self-worth is something that you've probably been evaluating too. I see that a lot with Aries first or Aries North node in general.
Hmm.
It's like, who am I in your creative, third house things? And
Hmm.
then also releasing like other people's belief systems, maybe ninth house
Hmm.
Libra or like other people's, you know.
Yeah. Do you want to speak on letting go of like, because I mean, first house, 10th or seventh house, that's like a
Mhm.
prominent thing that we're talking about. So leaving that like prominent axis and then
Oh
moving
yeah.
into 12th, 6, have you felt like the shift kind of less intensify?
Um, Not necessarily yet, perhaps, but also I am in my Saturn return and there's a lot of other stuff going on. But I would say that like something that was really notable for me and the eclipse story recently, it started October of 2023, I lost a friendship, a really close friendship, and I had to walk away from that. I had to purposefully, like, I tried clinging to it, but it was like just not going to happen. So I had to let it go.
Because that South Node is in your
Yes,
seventh.
South Node was in my 7th house. So this last year or so, I've been really evaluating, like, who am I? What are my needs? And then is it compatible with the needs of the people in my life?
Tight. Good that we connected after that.
I know. I've been doing, a lot of things have been shedding. A lot of people have been coming into my life actually, but also exiting. So it's like, and then as we're moving into the Pisces Pisces Virgo axis, which is my 12th and 6th house, I am getting more serious actually about my work. So this is like a job of mine, and like also taking enough time to I'm such a 12th houser. I isolate a lot, just generally, but I think I'm really learning how to balance that with like how I'm serving people and showing up in the earthly realm. I get lost in the dreamy Pisces, like, intuitive world. Like,
okay, my Virgo's here to ground you, baby.
Yes, thank you.
I got you.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm noticing so far, but I think time will tell.
Good. I'm good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, with that being said, do you have any other parting thoughts of things that you felt were really beneficial from the meetup that you wanted to hit on? Or do you feel like
there was a lot of like, just if you're moving through a breakup, there was stuff like that. There were new jobs. There were,
yeah, new jobs, big moves. Like when you think of like important like starting points in your life, you usually track it back to those things, and you might not realize that it lines up pretty fucking perfectly to an eclipse in your chart in that specific area of your chart too.
Yeah. Eclipses, they used to be something really feared, and some people still are really scared.
I hate fear mongering anything in astrology. Anything can suck if you allow it to be. If you go in with the mindset of this is gonna fucking suck, yeah, it might be a little bit harder. But if you go into it being like, this is gonna suck, but I can learn from it.
Yeah. So like the perspective that I like to think of with eclipses is that like this is your, fated checkpoint. If you're on your right path, maybe it won't be as turbulent, but if you're maybe a little off track, this is just the universe's way of like, let's get you back on track. So like if anyone's exiting your life, or you lose a job, or things aren't going your way, try to shift your perspective from like, woe is me, like everything's going to shit, to like, how is this an opportunity for me to start my new chapter? Because one of my favorite astrologers, Haley Comet Astrology, she had the coolest like perspective on this. If you've seen Legally Blonde, the beginning of the movie, she gets broken up with. It's like the worst thing ever. But then by the end, she doesn't even care about the man. She has a whole new career, a whole new boss ass bitch, like energy. Attitude. So think of this as like, if you're losing something right now, how is this your Elle Woods Legally Blonde moment?
That's
Isn't that cute?
I just always think of my dad showed me a song actually by Chris Cornell to stick with our little grungy theme. Yeah. Lead singer of Soundgarden, Temple of a Dog, Autoslave, The Gyps. But anyway, it's a song called Sun Shower that's quite literally like, how do you expect to grow if you don't get a little rain?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you need water to grow. Like you need that storm to pass in order for you to see the sun and appreciate the sun. And I know that's so fucking cliche and so fucking cheesy, but like, I don't know. The lyrics put it a lot better. I'm like butchering Chris Cornell's motion, but it's just a good mindset to be in, especially with like tougher astrology transits, which I know harbingers of change. Change is fucking hard. Change is not fun. That's a reason I brought this up at the astrology group meetup actually. People fear spiders a lot. Arachnophobia is a very like real and justifiable, phobia. But in a lot of cultures, spiders are held sacred as being a signifier of change or an omen of change. So when you see a spider, you like welcome it. You don't shoo it away, you don't kill it, you don't capture it and let it outside, which actually kills a lot of house spiders. So if you're doing that, it's they can't handle the outside temperature. That's why they're inside. Yeah.
And other animal medicines too, they think of this, the spider is the weaver. So you can also think of yourself like, what lessons can you learn from the spider of like weaving your own web? Are you weaving the web of your life that you desire to live in, or is it a shitty fucking web that you need to start over?
100%.
So
well, thank you so much for this chat. I appreciate you so much. Do you want to let our viewers know where they can reach you at or contact you at?
Sure. Instagram's a great way to connect with me. It's at BrenBigs, BrenBigs. I have a link to my Linktree and stuff there as well. Linktree/BrenBigs. Yeah. And what about you?
You can also find me on Instagram at Astro Rosalie, ASTRROSALIE. Rose is fine, but you can hit me up on Instagram, or you can email me at astrorosalie@gmail.com, or book a reading with me at astrorosalie.com.
Ooh, so professional.
I guess I pay way too much for that domain name, but it's fine.
Yeah, valid.
I only have to do like 1 or 2 readings a month to pay for it, so I'm not too pressed about it.
Valid. Well, thank you all so much for listening to us today. If you have any feedback or questions, we would really love to hear from you. So please do reach out and come to our Astro Meets. They are now every third Saturday from 11 to 1 p.m. at the Mercury Cafe here in Denver, Colorado.
Yes, and if you cannot join us, I hope you look forward to our next little recap episode. And again, please reach out if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or death threats. Always happy to help you out there.
Some send me death threats.
Yeah, just send them to me. Yeah, leave those away from Bren. Those can all be directed towards me. My Aquarius energy will match you. It's all right. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your night. Hydrate or die straight.
Don't die straight. Drag queer. Peace and blessings.